What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I'm back to start up a new thread in the YouTube metal community as I want to see other people chime in on this video, so I would recommend you guys who are watching this spread this video around to other YouTubers and such, because I would love to hear other people's thoughts on this particular subject, and that is comeback albums within metal, or 10 metal comeback albums. Now, I'm going to preface, this is not a top 10 list. I'm just showcasing 10 of my favorite comeback albums, or at least 10 comeback albums that are really important and that are worth talking about. There have been many great comeback albums in metal's history, even going all the way back to the early days of metal, like in the 70s and early 80s, even as far back as 1980. You had metal comeback albums, and we're going to talk about a couple of those later in the video. So like I said, not a top 10 list, I'm just here to showcase 10 albums, and this idea sprung about during a live stream I did about a week and a half ago, and Boss Antelope 86, I believe is his YouTube name, hopped into the stream with me, and we were just talking metal, and I was trying to think, okay, what can I do for a thread video? And we were talking about metal comeback albums, and I thought, you know what? That's a good thread to kind of talk about. Could end up becoming a top 10 list for a future episode of the Horseman podcast as well, because like I said, this is not a top 10 list I'm doing, I'm just showcasing 10 albums. But without further ado, I got them all in alphabetical order. I'm going to briefly talk about them, and the story, and all that good stuff. So let's get started with Accept, Blood of the Nations. Came out back in 2010 on Nuclear Blast Records. What a label to return on. And this was after a 14-year break in between releases, because 1996, not a great time for Accept. They put out an album and then broke up. Then in the mid-2000s, there was rumblings that Accept would get back together again, but it would be with four of the classic members, being Udo Dirkschneider, Herman Frank, Peter Baltes, and Wolf Hoffman, but Udo was hesitant about doing it and said that he would only do it if he got the copyrights to the band Accept. The rest of the guys said, no, you're not getting it, and Udo's like, okay, fine, I won't do it, and kept on with his solo stuff. So it led to Peter, Herman, and Wolf going out to find a new vocalist to continue, and would come across New Jersey frontman from TT Quick, Mark Tornillo. Now, if you ask me, Mark Tornillo, massive upgrade from Udo. That might be a hot take or an unpopular opinion, but I think Mark Tornillo's a much better singer than Udo Dirkschneider. It's like Udo's voice was cool and it was fitting for like a speed or thrash metal band, but he didn't quite have a good range in his voice. Whereas Mark Tornillo, he can sing low, and he can do some really cool high notes. He was almost like what would happen if he had Udo and Brian Johnson mixed together with Mark's own flavors and his vocal range coming through. And we get this album in 2010, and they get Andy Sneap to produce it, which is a hell of a choice, and put out Blood of the Nations. And one of the most pleasant surprises in metal in recent years was the return of Accept, and ever since this album, they've been on a tear, putting out great album after great album, like Stalingrad, especially Blind Rage. That was one of my favorites from the 2010s. Rise of Chaos, and even their last one, Too Mean to Die, was great. And it all started with Blood of the Nations, and like this album, talk about a definite like turn in Accept's sound. Like Accept was all about like the sleazy classic metal with little hints of speed and like kind of influencing on thrash. Here, you get those elements, but the lyrics definitely take a turn away from being all about sleaze and more about social issues, especially on tracks like The Abyss, Pandemic, New World Coming, definitely touching on some pretty heavy subjects. But you do get your token Accept stuff like Kill the Pain and Beat the Bastards, where they're all about just telling it like it is. But songs on here I really loved are Teutonic Terror, The Abyss, and Shades of Death, especially. Shades of Death. I can listen to that over and over and never get bored. But yeah, the guitar tone is massive, the drum work is solid, Mark's voice is killer, and Peter's bass comes through the mix quite well too. So yeah, definitely check this out. If you've been sleeping on Accept in recent years, definitely check out their recent work. Start with this, because this is what started the amazing comeback run Accept has been on since then for the past 12 years. So check this out. Next up, one that's near and dear to my heart in terms of the band, and that is Alice in Chains with Black Gives Way to Blue. Of course, you know, huge fan of Alice in Chains. I did a whole discography ranking, and I think I ranked this at number 3 on my list, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, this was a hell of a return, especially since, you know, you had the Tripod album in 95. Then after that, stopped making albums, though they had a couple of studio tracks like Get Born Again and Died that did not make albums. Well, they made like compilations and greatest hits kind of shit. But after we lost Lane Staley in 2002, it's like people thought, well, what's going to happen with Alice in Chains? They get back together in the mid-2000s doing festivals with like different vocalists and singers coming in, like James Hetfield, Maynard James Keenan, Phil Anselmo, Sebastian Bach, all doing like a song or two for Alice in Chains, and then get William Duvall to come in to do vocals and rhythm guitar. And then they get in the studio and pump out this album in 2009, and wow, just absolutely incredible. Like, they got heavier somehow than they already were. It's like, again, a lot of people lump Alice in Chains into the whole grunge thing, and I'm like, just because they came from Seattle doesn't mean they are a grunge band. To me, they're a metal band. Doom metal, even, because they're very slow in their tempo, and this album certainly showcases that, especially on tracks like All Secrets Known, A Looking in View, Acid Bubble, Lesson Learned. Those are kind of doom dirges, honestly. But then you get your classic, like, balladish tracks like Your Decision and the title track with Elton John doing the piano. Beautiful stuff, and very personal album, too. Like I said, it's so thick in its guitar sound. Vocally, it was Jerry Cantrell taking over the bulk of the vocals, with William Duvall getting moments. But William's a great replacement. Even though he's not nearly as good as Lane Staley, he does a serviceable job. Actually, a great job, and he adds a unique character to the band now. But yeah, Black Gives Way to Blue by Alice in Chains. One of my favorite comeback albums, especially in recent times, given the circumstances with losing Lane and it being 14 years in between releases. But yeah, if you've slept on Alice in Chains for a long time, I would recommend checking this out. You will not regret it. Next up, going back to my point I was making in the intro, that comeback albums have stretched all the way back as far as 1980. Well, there's 2 albums that came out in 1980 that made this video, and one of them is right here, and that is Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell. Now, some people might think, well, how is this considered a comeback? They had an album just 2 years prior. Well, when you think about it in context, after Sabotage in 1975, Black Sabbath kind of hit rock bottom the first time. And that was with Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die not being that good in terms of studio output, and the final 2 of the Ozzy era at that time. Not a great time for Sabbath. Also, their personal lives were deteriorating due to the drugs and alcohol abuse. So after they fired Ozzy, Ronnie James Dio steps into the band and revitalizes Black Sabbath, made them more metal than they were in the past 2 albums, and the most metal album they did since Sabotage, right here with Heaven and Hell. Also, getting Martin Birch to do the production on this album was a huge move, considering Martin had already done work with Dio and Rainbow, and eventually would do, I think he did Whitesnake at this point, and was just about ready to do Iron Maiden for the next 12 years. But yeah, Heaven and Hell, I mean, what more can I say about this album that hasn't been said in the past? from me. I mean, Neon Nights, Children of the Sea, Heaven and Hell, Die Young, Lonely as the Word, Wishing Well, Walk Away, Lady Evil. Like, every song is magical. Definitely my favorite of the Dio Sabbath albums, and it was a hell of a comeback considering, you know, Ozzy's gone, Sabbath wasn't in the best of spots in the late 70s. They pick up this tiny guy from New York who has such an incredible vocal range, and they bring him in, and it's almost a different band because Dio's style of vocals much different from Ozzy, and also his phrasing was different, whereas Ozzy would sing along to the riff while Dio would compose his own melody while the guitars do their own thing. And this album is monstrous, it's beautiful. Check it out if you haven't already. If you haven't checked it out, how the hell are you here? But check it out anyways. And before we move on, drink. So, now we get to another album near and dear to my heart. Carcass, Surgical Steel. Came out in 2013 after 17 years since Swan Song came out in 96 and then breaking up in 96. Then we get the rumblings that they would get back together, and they did in 2007 with Bill Steer, Jeff Walker, Michael Amott, and arch-enemy drummer Daniel Erlandson coming in to fill in because Ken Owen obviously couldn't play drums consistently anymore after something that happened to him in the late 90s that led him to being in a coma. But yeah, playing festivals and shows, and then they get into the studio, though it's only Jeff, Bill, and also new drummer Dan Wilding, and they put out this masterpiece back in 2013. They're on Nuclear Blast, and actually produced by Colin Richardson, but mixed and mastered by Andy Sneap. And wow, this album is basically like the all-encompassing Carcass. Like, it mixes in a little bit of like the Symphonies of Sickness era in terms of the vocals, but musically it like sits right in between necroticism and hard work. One of the best melodic one of the best melodic death metal albums of the past 20 years for damn sure. And for me, maybe my favorite Carcass album. Even though Hard Work is the benchmark album, I love this album a little bit more than Hard Work. Even though I will objectively state Hard Work's the better album, but this I like a little bit more. Especially in the second half when you get to tracks like Unfit for Human Consumption, Captive Bolt Pistol. But the thing that makes this my favorite Carcass album, Mount of Execution, the closing track. Fucking amazing song. Up to this point, their longest track until Flesh-Ripping Sonic Torment Limited on Torn Arteries last year. But yeah, fucking phenomenal album. And look at that album cover. That is so fitting of Carcass with the surgical tools. Looking back, I wish that I would have gotten the special edition that came with a first aid kit, because that would have been fucking cool. But yeah, fucking masterpiece. Check it out if you've not listened to it in a long time. Next up, we get not only a comeback album, but a farewell album to one of the all-time greats in the 80s, and also one of the pioneers of extreme metal, Celtic Frost with Monotheist. You all know my opinion on this album if you watched my Celtic Frost discography ranking earlier back in May. But yeah, this is a masterpiece album, and like, I loved Vanity Nemesis, but then that was their last album for 16 years. They get back together in 2000 or 2001 and go to the studio to work on this album for a long time, and that time certainly paid off because they were able to craft some beautifully dark, haunting, gothic death doom right here. Like, there's nothing really black metal about it. Not really that much in terms of like a thrash bite. This is like doomy, gothic death metal, whatever you want to call it. Songs like Progeny, Ground, A Dying God Coming into Human Flesh, Oz Abysmi Veldath, Synagogue of Satane. I mean, just haunting, heavy, disturbing sounding stuff. And it's a shame that this would be the last Celtic Frost album, and then they broke up 2 years after. But hey, we got Triptychon right now, and that's basically the continuation of this album. So if you haven't listened to Monotheist by Celtic Frost in a long time, definitely listen to it now. Now we get to an obvious one on my list here, and that is Iron Maiden Brave New World. After all, you know, even with, like, No Prayer for the Dying and Fear of the Dark, not the best Maiden albums, but certainly not slouches. Like, they're good albums, but not, like, amazing or anything like that. And then you get to the Blaze Bayley era, where The X Factor was a pretty good album, but then you get Virtual 11, which is just meh. And then they get Bruce Dickinson and Adrian Smith back into the band, and the first album with the triple guitar approach with Adrian, Dave, and Yannick. And they put out this masterpiece. First one produced by, I believe this was the first one produced by Kevin Shirley. And, I mean, top to bottom, just wonderfully crafted tunes like The Wicker Man, Ghost of the Navigator, Blood Brothers, Dream of Mirrors, The Thin Line Between Love and Hate. Just wonderful songs. Definitely the best Maiden album since Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, for damn sure. And it's one of the band's best albums, period, as well. Not just because it's with Bruce and Adrian back, but maybe like 10% of that, but 90% is because the music is absolutely incredible. So, if you haven't listened to this one in a long time, definitely check it out. Next up, we get to an interesting one, and that is Creator, Violent Revolution. This came out in 2001 on Steamhammer/SPV Records, and this was an interesting time for Creator because throughout the majority of the 90s, Creator was kind of all over the place in terms of what in the hell they were doing with their music. Started off the 90s on a strong note with Coma of Souls, which is one of the best Creator albums ever, one of the best German thrash albums of all time. But then, after that, I guess just because like everybody wanted to try and be like Metallica with the Black Album, try and write stuff that's more accessible but still keeping a heavy edge to it. And only a couple bands did that right, like Megadeth and Testament were really the only ones that adapted and made it great. Creator was another case of that, but in this sense, not that good. Like, they went from thrash to kind of like industrial groove metal for a few albums, then completely hitting rock bottom with Endorama by going gothic metal, which you did not expect to hear that from Creator. I'm not saying the albums were terrible, they just weren't that great. Like, they were okay at best, but then you get to this album, and I think one of the big reasons why they went back to their roots was because, well, actually a couple of reasons. One of their peers, Sodom, returned to their thrash roots just a couple years prior with Code Red, so that kind of had to inspire Milla and Jurgen to kind of return to their roots a bit, but also getting I can't pronounce his last name, but Sammy, who's a Finnish guy, coming in on lead guitar and fucking gave like a giant shot in the arm to Creator, and then they come out with this album and producing some heavy fucking thrash, but also bringing in more classic metal melody, like especially from Iron Maiden. And that melody continues to get expanded into their current run. I mean, hell, just tomorrow, the day after this video is posted, we get the new album, Hate Uber's Alles. I think I butchered that, but definitely going to review that this weekend. But yeah, this album, tracks like the title track, Servant in Heaven, King in Hell, Ghetto War, Slave Machinery, Replicas of Life, just top to bottom, awesome, awesome music. And I believe Jens Bogren even did the production on this. If not, I'll have to go back and look. Maybe Andy Sneap, I can't remember. But fucking amazing album. If you haven't jammed it, check it out. So only 3 more left, and this next one is another recent one that came out in 2019, and I'll explain why I have it on the list, and that is Nocturnus AD with Paradox. Came out in 2019 on Profound Lore Records. Now, some people might think, well, how's this a comeback? This is their debut. Well, technically it's a comeback because of Nocturnus. Like, this stems from Mike Browning's classic band Nocturnus, and really after the mid-90s, he was out of Nocturnus, and after that, Nocturnus just kind of became a shell of what they used to be. And after the original Nocturnus was pretty much dead, Mike Browning had this band called After Death. But then after the rest of the guys in Nocturnus of the classic band just decided, you know what, screw it, we're not even going to keep going, Mike Browning decided, you know what, I want to get the Nocturnus name out there, but obviously I can't use the name right now because I haven't gotten a hold of the rest of the guys to actually get the name back. So he decided to pick up some different musicians and form Nocturnus AD, and we get to Paradox. And it's a comeback for me because 20 years before with Ethereal Tomb, not the best album. And then after that, the band was pretty much dead, revitalized under a new moniker with Nocturnus AD. And this album is a fucking masterpiece. It was one of my favorites of 2019 because it's basically The Key Part 2. Like, it's Part 2 of their amazing debut, The Key. And Mike even admitted this was basically the sequel to The Key because he wanted to continue the story that The Key had, especially the closing track, and made a monumental album. Tracks like Seizing the Throne, Procession of the Equinoxes, The Antechamber, Return of the Lost Key, Aeon of the Ancient Ones. Basically just keeping that like Lovecraftian sci-fi elements. And I mean, even the album cover reflects that, and it feels like a continuation of the album cover from The Key. So if you haven't listened to Nocturnus in a long time, or have never heard of this album, give this a listen. It is progressive death metal mastery. To the penultimate album, going back to earlier when talking about Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell, how as far back as 1980 we had comeback albums. Speaking of Ozzy Osbourne, we get to Ozzy Osbourne, The Blizzard of Oz. Again, some people might think, well, how is this a comeback album? This is Ozzy's first solo album. Well, after getting fired from Black Sabbath, nobody knew what Ozzy was about ready to do. Because who knew if he was even going to be alive, because his drug and alcohol abuse is legendary. So people thought, well, what's Ozzy going to do after being in such a huge band? Well, he would eventually come across guitar player Randy Rhoads from Quiet Riot and come across other musicians and put this album together in 1980 with The Blizzard of Oz. And wow. And even like rock documentaries and like magazines and journalists will say Ozzy putting out this album was one of the greatest comebacks in rock history, because who would have thought Ozzy would have a gift of picking out really good musicians and come up with these brilliant songs like I Don't Know, Crazy Train, Goodbye the Romance, Suicide Solution, Mr. Crowley, Revelation, Mother Earth, just top to bottom, wonderful stuff. And of course, Randy Rhoads. What else can be said about Randy Rhoads that hasn't been said already? Gone way too soon, one of the greatest guitar players to ever live. That nice balance between like the bluesy metal of Sabbath with classical play. And this album, still in my opinion, the best Ozzy solo album. It's not been touched, though he's had great ones. Really everything through to No More Tears, a flawless run. After No More Tears, but still, Blizzard of Oz, fucking outstanding. Check it out if you haven't already or haven't listened to it in a long time. And now for my final album, another one near and dear to my heart because of its being one of my favorite bands, Testament, The Formation of Damnation. 2008 on Nuclear Blast Records, Andy Sneap producing, of course. And, well, this, I know a lot of people would say The Gathering is a comeback album considering where they were the album prior with Demonic. But to me, this is more of an actual comeback album because it was 9 years after The Gathering came out, and in between that 9 years, almost tragic stuff happened with Testament, like Chuck Billy getting diagnosed with sickle cell disease, some kind of cancer, eventually fought and is clean and healthy, and so much other bad stuff was going on in the band. But they come back mid-2000s. Well, they never broke up, but was back active in the mid-2000s, getting Alex Skolnick and Greg Christian back into the band, picking up Paul Bostaph on drums, and pumped out this modern thrash metal masterpiece. I mean, starting out with For the Glory of, Into More Than Meets the Eye, the title track, Henchman Ride, just amazing, heavy, balls-to-the-wall songs, and really propelling Testament into the upper echelon in terms of classic thrash now. Whereas, yeah, they were always seen as a big thrash band back in the 80s and early 90s, but in terms of being seen as like mainstream heroes, it all started here, and they've been on a great run since, all the way through to Titans of Creation just 2 years ago. But yeah, Formation of Damnation, such a wonderfully crafted album. And of course, Alex Skolnick laying down his leads, and even Eric Peterson bringing in his flair in terms of doing lead work. And they both complement each other so well, especially here. So, yeah, if you haven't listened to this album in a long time, definitely check it out. It's fucking great. But anyways, yeah, that was my list, and it was hard to whittle it down to just 10 for this video, because there are so many other albums I could have brought up. Like, I'll just name a couple, like Possess, Revelations of Oblivion, Anthrax, Worship Music. So much I could have went through, but I whittled it down to 10. But that's just my list of albums to showcase. What are some of your favorite metal comeback albums? Again, let me know in the comments section below. Or if you're a YouTuber watching this, I would love to see you do this video, because I would love to hear other people's thoughts on not just these albums, but other comeback albums out there in the metal world. But anyways, thank you guys for watching, and until next time, horns high. See you guys soon. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing ShitTech's brand new Shit Can. This revolutionary on-the-go product will be the biggest savior of your life. Say you're at a hotel that doesn't have any toilets, or you're stranded out in the middle of nowhere as your car breaks down, you can take the ShitTech Shit Can with you if you need to take a dump, piss, or puke whenever you need to.
Yep, you can never go wrong with GIF media files.
You are aware it's pronounced GIF, right?
Oh no, silly, this is a GIF.
Damn it, we don't even have spam in here! Whoa!